Ladies and gentlemen, friends, and fellow citizens watching today, let's begin with a moment of clarity. We live in a nation built on the promise of fair representation, where every voice matters and where the people, not the power brokers, decide the course of our democracy. Today, as we look toward the critical battlegrounds of the 2026 elections, something remarkable has happened. A figure whose words carry the weight of history has stepped into the fray. With calm resolve and steadfast conviction, he called California's plan to redraw its congressional map a responsible, measured response, not in pursuit of advantage, but as defense of our democratic foundation in a moment of extraordinary risk. There are moments in our democracy when the rules of the game are tested, when the basic principle that every citizen deserves an equal say is challenged. And in those moments, we face a choice: do we sit back, shrug our shoulders, and hope fairness somehow finds its way back into the system? Or do we stand up with steady hands and measured voices and say that protecting the foundation of our democracy requires action? Thoughtful, deliberate action? This is one of those moments across the country. We've seen the maps that decide representation twisted and carved into shapes that serve politicians instead of people. Lines that should reflect neighborhoods and communities have instead been bent into tools of power. And when one side chooses to tilt the field, to redraw the rules mid-game, the temptation might be to respond with the same kind of blunt force. But that is not leadership. That is not how you preserve the trust of a free people. What's been offered instead is something more careful. A response rooted not in revenge, but in responsibility. It says, if you alter the rules to your advantage, we will not stay silent. But our answer will be measured. It will be narrow. It will be temporary. It will aim not to seize more than our share, but to restore balance, to make sure the voters, not the politicians, still hold the power. That is how you defend democracy without diminishing it. Think about what that means in practice. It means that when maps are manipulated, they won't go unchallenged. But it also means we don't lose sight of the larger goal. The larger goal isn't to draw lines that favor one party over another. The goal is to make sure every vote carries equal weight. The goal is to ensure that communities of color, young people, working families, and rural towns all have the chance to send representatives who actually reflect their lives and their struggles. That's the heart of the American promise. Now, some will say this kind of response doesn't go far enough. They'll argue that the only way to fight fire is with fire, that fairness can't survive in a system where one side refuses to play by the rules. But history tells us something different. History tells us that progress comes not from abandoning our principles, but from holding them even tighter when they're under assault. It comes from showing that democracy can correct itself without breaking itself. And make no mistake, the impact of these choices will shape what happens in 2026 and beyond, because elections aren't just about who wins a seat in Congress. They're about whether the people believe the system still belongs to them. They're about whether citizens show up, cast their ballots, and trust that those ballots matter. So this is the task before us: to answer manipulation not with silence but with fairness, to meet power grabs not with retaliation, but with a steady hand, to prove that democracy, though imperfect, is still resilient enough to face down its challenges. That's the path forward. That's the kind of response this moment demands: measured, principled, and unyielding in the defense of the people's voice. Democracy has always been about more than casting a ballot. At its core, it's about trust that the system is fair, that every citizen has an equal stake, and that the rules are not tilted in favor of the few at the expense of the many. When that trust erodes, when people begin to wonder if their voices matter, the very foundation of self-government begins to crack. That's why preserving fairness isn't a side issue. It is the issue. We know the challenges. Across the country, maps are being drawn in ways that make voters feel powerless. Communities are split apart, districts are stretched beyond recognition, and outcomes are decided before a single vote is cast. That's not democracy. That's manipulation dressed up in the language of procedure. And in moments like these, the responsibility is clear. We can't simply stand by and allow the core principle of equal representation to be hollowed out. Preserving fairness requires more than outrage. It requires discipline. It requires a willingness to take steps that are careful, even limited in scope, but designed to defend the integrity of the process. It's not about gaining an advantage. It's about protecting the level playing field. It's about reminding people that their votes still matter, that the system still belongs to them. Consider what happens when fairness is honored. When districts reflect real communities, neighbors can see themselves in their leaders. They can walk into a polling place knowing the outcome isn't already pre-written. They can believe deep down that their voice carries weight. That belief is the fuel that drives participation. It's what keeps people engaged election after election. Now, some might ask, why not answer manipulation with manipulation? Why not redraw lines with the same kind of brute force used by those who seek to rig the system? The answer is simple, because fairness isn't something you preserve by abandoning it. You preserve fairness by holding on to it, even when it's hard, even when it feels like you're fighting with one hand tied behind your back. The power of democracy comes not from bending the rules to our advantage, but from demonstrating that the rules themselves can be trusted. That doesn't mean we sit idle. It means we respond with solutions that are proportionate, transparent, and temporary when needed. It means we keep pressing for national reforms that end partisan manipulation once and for all. It means we stand firm in saying that the people, not politicians, are the ones who should choose their representatives. Because in the end, preserving fairness isn't just about winning the next election. It's about strengthening the bond between the governed and those who govern. It's about showing our children that democracy, though imperfect, can live up to its promise if we are willing to defend it. And it's about proving once again that even in moments of division, fairness is not just an aspiration, it is the standard by which we measure our common life together. Elections are about choices, but they are also about consequences. The midterms, in particular, have always served as a kind of report card, an opportunity for the people to weigh in, to say whether the country is moving in the right direction or whether a new course is needed. That's why what happens in the run up to 2026 carries such weight. The decisions being made today about how districts are drawn, how representation is shaped, and how power is distributed will directly influence not only who wins and loses, but how much faith people continue to place in the system itself. Every seat in the House is up for grabs. Every district becomes a test of whether democracy can remain open and fair in the face of manipulation. And because the margins are narrow, because control of Congress often hangs by just a few seats, the maps that decide where those lines are drawn matter as much as the campaigns themselves. A handful of districts redrawn in one state could tilt the balance of power for the entire nation. That's not theory, it's the practical reality of how fragile and how precious our democracy really is. Now, some might think of redistricting as a dry exercise and cartography, just numbers and borders on a map. But make no mistake, behind every line drawn is a voice either strengthened or silenced. Behind every district is a community either empowered to choose its leaders or carved apart to dilute its influence. And when these decisions are made, the ripple effects extend far beyond one election cycle. They shape the kind of legislation that gets introduced, the priorities that get debated, the values that are defended or ignored in the halls of Congress. That's why the strategic choices being made today matter so deeply. When you defend fairness in one state, it sends a message to voters in every state their voices are worth protecting. When you push back against manipulation, you don't just affect the outcome in 2026, you set the tone for how democracy operates in the years to come. The stakes aren't confined to party control. They touch every issue that matters in people's daily lives: healthcare, wages, education, security, and opportunity. If fairness is preserved, voters will feel the system still belongs to them. They will show up, even in a midterm year, because they believe their votes make a difference. But if fairness is undermined, if elections are seen as pre-decided, turnout falls, cynicism grows, and the very legitimacy of the system erodes. That is a cost too high to bear. So the strategic impact of the 2026 midterms is not simply about flipping seats or building majorities. It is about renewing the bond between citizens and their democracy. It is about proving that even when the rules are tested, we can choose integrity over manipulation. And it is about ensuring that the story of America remains one written not by politicians drawing lines in back rooms, but by the people standing up, speaking out, and shaping their future together. There comes a point when patchwork solutions, however necessary in the short term, are not enough. A moment when the stakes demand something bigger, bolder, more permanent, because as important as it is to respond in the moment, to push back against manipulation in one state, to protect fairness in another, the truth is we cannot keep playing defense forever. If we want democracy to endure, if we want the people's trust to be restored, then we need reform at the national level. For too long, redistricting has been treated as a partisan game. Every 10 years after the census, politicians huddle in back rooms, armed with software and polling data, to decide which voters count more than others. And every 10 years, communities are split apart, voices are diluted, and the system drifts further from its promise of equal representation. It doesn't have to be this way. Other nations have figured out how to draw fair maps. Some states have already shown it can be done through independent commissions. What's missing is the will to make fairness the standard across the entire country. National reform means setting rules that apply everywhere, not just where leaders happen to value fairness. It means saying that voters should pick their leaders, not the other way around. It means drawing lines that reflect neighborhoods and communities, not partisan advantage. And it means putting in place a process that is transparent, impartial, and trusted by the people it serves. Now, I know change of that scale is never easy. Those who benefit from the status quo will fight to keep it. They will argue that reform is unrealistic, that it can't be done, that the system is too entrenched. But history reminds us that progress always meets resistance. The Voting Rights Act wasn't inevitable. Expanding the right to vote to women and to young people, inevitable. None of the great leaps forward in our democracy came without struggle. But each was achieved because ordinary citizens demanded something better and refused to accept excuses. The call for reform is not about punishing one side or rewarding the other. It's about protecting the principle that every citizen counts. It's about making sure that whether you live in a big city or a small town, whether you're wealthy or working class, your voice carries equal weight. That's the promise we've made to ourselves since the beginning, and that's the promise we have to keep if democracy is going to survive. So, yes, the short-term responses matter. They buy us time. They preserve fairness in critical moments. But they cannot be the end of the story. The end of the story must be a democracy where fairness is not the exception, but the rule. Where maps aren't redrawn in secret, but in daylight. Where the trust of the people isn't an afterthought, but the very foundation of the system. That's the kind of reform we need. And that's the reform we must fight for together. In life, timing matters. In politics, it can make all the difference. The right action taken too late often loses its impact, while the wrong action rushed in haste can do more harm than good. When it comes to defending democracy, timing is not just important, it is essential. Because the forces that seek to tilt the playing field rarely wait. They move quickly, quietly, hoping no one will notice until it's too late. And so the question becomes, will we act with urgency when the moment demands it? Or will we stand by and allow the foundation of our democracy to be weakened before our eyes? The recent battles over redistricting illustrate this truth. When one state chooses to alter its maps in ways that undermine fairness, waiting years to respond is not an option. By then, the damage is already baked into the system, representation is skewed, voters are discouraged, and the outcome of elections is shaped long before ballots are cast. That's why the decision to step in now, not later, carries such weight. It signals that attempts to manipulate democracy will not go unanswered, that fairness still has defenders willing to move at the moment of greatest need. Timing also matters because elections are not abstract events. They are lived realities, shaping the issues that affect families every day. A district drawn unfairly today becomes a Congress tomorrow that fails to reflect the will of the people. And once legislation is written, once policies are enacted, the consequences ripple outward for years. Acting swiftly to defend fairness isn't just about the next election. It's about the opportunities and protections that shape the lives of millions of Americans long after the votes are counted. But timing isn't only about urgency, it's also about restraint. Responding in the moment doesn't mean overreaching. It doesn't mean abandoning principle for expedience. It means calibrating the response so it is proportionate, targeted, and temporary if need be. That balance is what separates leadership from gamesmanship. It demonstrates that action is guided not by a thirst for power, but by a commitment to fairness. And when people see that, when they recognize that timing was chosen carefully, not recklessly, they are more likely to trust the process and continue believing in it. We should also remember that timing is not just about leaders making decisions. It's about citizens, too. Movements are built when people recognize that the moment has arrived for their voices to be heard. Change comes when ordinary folks decide that waiting is no longer acceptable, that silence is no longer an option. Every generation faces a point when timing presses upon them, when history is watching to see if they will rise to the occasion. So yes, timing is everything. It is the difference between defending democracy in the moment of trial or looking back years later and wishing we had done more. It is the reminder that fairness delayed is often fairness denied. And it is the challenge before us now to meet this moment with urgency, with precision, and with an unshakable faith in the power of the people to shape their future. So here's the lesson for us all: when democracy is tested, we do not retreat. We respond, not with fear, not with expedience, but with the kind of strategic resolve that honors our history and safeguards our future. Because in every redrawn line and every contested vote, what's at stake isn't just control of Congress, it is the promise of our nation. Let us carry that promise forward, principled, purposeful, and unwavering. Thank you.